My mother always said to dress for the occasion, but she never mentioned what one wears to their own execution. On my 30th birthday, the Crescent Room was packed with family and strangers. When my father tapped his glass, I expected a toast. Instead, he handed me an envelope that shattered my identity. I thought they were throwing a party to celebrate me, but they had actually gathered an audience to watch them finally throw me away. My life in Brookridge was a masterpiece of carefully curated stability, a structure I had built brick by brick to withstand the tremors of my upbringing. At 30 years old, I had finally achieved a kind of equilibrium that felt safe. If not entirely joyful, I worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown, a job that required a level of organizational obsession that came naturally to me. My boss, Marcus, was a man who believed that deadlines were merely suggestions he could change on a whim, usually at 4 p.m. on a Friday. He thrived on chaos. I thrived on containing it. It was Tuesday, 4 days before my birthday, and the office was humming with the low, frantic energy of a campaign launch. I was juggling 3 different timelines for a client who sold organic pet food and could not decide between a serif or sans serif font. Marcus had stormed past my desk twice in the last hour, dropping vague criticisms about the lack of pop in the visuals, but I had learned to filter his voice. I focused on the spreadsheet in front of me, the clean lines of the grid, the comforting certainty of the data. Here, in the glow of my dual monitors, I was competent, I was valued, I was the one who made things work. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a sip of lukewarm coffee. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see the skyline of Brookridge, a city that was big enough to get lost in, but small enough to feel like a community. I had moved here 5 years ago, putting a healthy 40 miles of highway between myself and the suffocating suburbs of Willow Creek where I grew up. That distance was my moat, my apartment, a tidy 1-bedroom with hardwood floors and a balcony that looked over a park was my castle. But even castles have gates, and mine were currently being battered by the relentless determination of my parents. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from the family group chat. Richard reservations confirmed for the Crescent Room. Saturday at 7. Do not be late. Elaine. And please, Julia, wear something bright. No more of that drab gray you seem to love so much. We want you to shine. I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest, a physical reaction I had conditioned myself to ignore. My relationship with Richard and Elaine Morgan was a complex dance of obligation and guilt. To the outside world, they were the picture of suburban success retired, well-dressed, active in the community. To me, they were a constant, low-frequency signal of disapproval. I had tried to deflect the party. I had suggested a small dinner, perhaps just Italian takeout with my best friend, Allison, and a bottle of red wine. I wanted quiet. I wanted peace. But Richard and Elaine did not do quiet. They did performances. My 30th birthday had been seized upon as an opportunity for them to host a gala in their own honor, a chance to gather the extended family and show off how benevolent they were. I typed back a simple, "Okay, sounds good," and flipped the phone face down. I kept a journal in the top drawer of my nightstand, a habit I had started in high school when I realized that speaking my feelings aloud usually resulted in being told I was too sensitive or remembering things wrong. That night, after I dragged myself home from the office and reheated a bowl of soup, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the leather-bound book. I feel like I'm walking into a trap. I wrote, the ink was dark against the cream paper. I know that sounds paranoid. It is just a birthday dinner, but they are trying too hard. Dad invited Great Aunt Sarah, who hates traveling. Mom insisted I invite Marcus and Ben from work. Why do they want an audience? I catch myself thinking that maybe they just want to be nice, that maybe I am the problem, maybe I am ungrateful. But then I remember the tone of Mom's voice when she told me to fix my hair. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a correction. I closed the book and rubbed my temples. This was the cycle. They would criticize me. I would feel hurt, and then I would gaslight myself into believing I was overreacting. They aren't that bad. I would tell myself, they paid for your college. They let you live at home for a summer when you were 22. They are just old-fashioned. But the anxiety in my gut told a different story. The tension had been building for weeks, but the breaking point had occurred 7 days prior, at a mandatory family dinner. It was the inciting incident that was currently casting a long, dark shadow over the upcoming weekend. My parents' house in Willow Creek was a museum of beige carpets and uncomfortably stiff furniture. It was a place where coasters were mandatory, and laughter always felt slightly too loud. I had driven over on a Thursday evening, armed with a bottle of wine as a peace offering. When I arrived, my younger brother, Tyler, was already there, lounging on the sofa with his feet up, drinking a beer. Tyler was 27, handsome in a lazy golden boy sort of way, and entirely devoid of ambition. He had bounced between 3 colleges, dropped out of all of them, and currently works sporadically as a consultant for a friend's startup. A job description that seemed to involve a lot of video games and very little consulting. "Hey, Jules," he said, not bothering to get up. "Happy early birthday. Thanks." "Tyler," I said, hanging my coat in the hallway. My mother swept into the room, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You look tired. Julia, are you eating enough? Your face looks drawn." "I am fine." "Mom," I said, handing her the wine. "Just busy with work? We have a big launch coming up." "Work, work, work," my father said, coming in from the kitchen wiping his hands on a towel. "You will work yourself into an early grave. You should take a page out of Tyler's book. He knows how to enjoy life." I forced a smile. Someone has to pay the bills. Dinner was a roast chicken, cooked perfectly and served with an air of formality that made digestion difficult. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was standard fare, my father complaining about the local zoning board, my mother gossiping about a neighbor's divorce. I ate quietly, nodding at the right intervals, playing the role of the dutiful daughter. Then, the tone shifted. Tyler cleared his throat, setting his fork down with a deliberate clatter. "So," he said, flashing a charming, sheepish grin at our parents, "I was talking to those investors I told you about. For the app idea, the fitness app my father asked, his eyes lighting up. He always lit up for Tyler." "Yeah," Tyler said. "They are really interested, but they need me to show some liquidity before they sign the contract. Just to prove I'm serious." "How much?" my mother asked. Her voice was soft, indulgent. "5,000, Tyler said. "Just for a few months. I will pay it back with interest once the funding comes through." My parents exchanged a look. It was a look I knew well, the silent calculation of their own finances. They lived comfortably, but they spent heavily on appearances, the country club membership, the leasing of luxury cars, the endless renovations to the house. "We are a little tied up right now, son," my father said, frowning. "With the market taking a dip, our liquid assets are a bit committed until the end of the quarter." Tyler's face fell. He looked like a puppy that had been kicked. "Oh, okay. I guess I will just tell them I can't do it. It is a shame. Though, it was $1 million idea." The guilt in the room was palpable. My mother looked at Tyler. Then she turned her head slowly and looked at me. "Julia," she said. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What you have been saving, haven't you?" she asked. "You are always talking about that nest egg of yours." "I am saving for a house," I said, my voice steady but my heart beginning to hammer. "You know that. I want to buy a place next year. But you have the money sitting there," my father said, jumping in. "Tyler just needs a bridge loan. It is family business. Julia." I looked at Tyler. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking at his fingernails, expecting the money to simply manifest. He had never paid me back for anything in his life. He still owed me $600 for car repairs I had covered 2 years ago. "I can't," I said. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. "Can't," my mother repeated, her voice dropping an octave. "Or won't I don't have $5,000 to lend on a risky venture," I said, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. "I have student loans. Mom, I have rent. The money in my savings is for a down payment. I can't touch it. Risky venture. Tyler scoffed. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Sis, it is not about confidence. I said, it is about math. I cannot afford to lose that money. You are being incredibly selfish, my mother said, her lips thinning into a straight line. Your brother needs help. He has an opportunity. And you are sitting on a pile of cash, refusing to lift a finger. I worked for that cash. I said, feeling a flush of heat rise up my neck. I worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years. Oh, listen to her, my father said, throwing his napkin on the table. The martyr. You think you are better than us, don't you? Julia. I never said that. I protested. You act like it, he snapped. You with your little city apartment and your career. You look down on your brother. You look down on us. That is not true, I said, tears pricking my eyes. I just want to buy a home. Why is that wrong? Because family comes first, my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table. We raised you to be loyal. We gave you everything. And now, when we ask for one thing, you turn your back on us. I am not turning my back, I said, my voice shaking. I am saying no to a loan. You don't truly belong in this family, my mother said quietly. The words hung in the air, suspended like smoke. I stared at her, stunned. What did you say? I said you don't belong, she repeated, her eyes cold and hard. Not with that attitude. You act like a stranger, a cold, ungrateful stranger. Maybe she is, Tyler muttered, smirking. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I think I should go. Sit down, my father commanded. We are not finished. I said. I walked out of the house with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't look back. As I fumbled for my keys in the driveway, I expected them to come after me, to apologize, to say they didn't mean it. But the front door remained closed. The week that followed was a cold war of silence. I went to work. I came home. I stared at my phone, waiting for an apology that never came. Instead, the atmosphere shifted in a way I couldn't quite understand. I had expected them to cancel the birthday dinner, or to uninvite me, or to continue the barrage of angry texts. But after 2 days of radio silence, the tone changed. The anger evaporated, replaced by something far more unsettling. My mother called me on Wednesday, her voice light and airy, as if she hadn't eviscerated my character over a roast chicken a few nights prior. She talked about the menu at the Crescent Room. She talked about the cake. She didn't mention the money. She didn't mention Tyler. It was gaslighting at its finest. Pretend it didn't happen. And if you bring it up, you are the one ruining the peace. But there was something else in her voice, a kind of giddiness, a suppressed excitement that didn't match the situation. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had the distinct impression of people whispering behind a closed door, planning a surprise that I wasn't going to like. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up to a gray, overcast sky. The text from my mother arrived at 9 a.m. Don't forget to dress nicely tonight. A lot of people will be watching. I sat up in bed, reading the message over and over. A lot of people will be watching. It was a strange choice of words. Not everyone will be there. But watching, as if I were going to be on display, as if I were a specimen in a jar. I spent the day in a haze of anxiety. I went for a run, trying to burn off the nervous energy. I cleaned my apartment until it sparkled. I called Allison, who tried to talk me down. Just get through dinner. Allison said, eat the free steak, drink the expensive wine, and then we will leave and go to that dive bar you like. I will be right there with you. I have a bad feeling. Al, I said, pacing my living room, they are up to something. They are too happy. Maybe they realize they were jerks about the money and are trying to overcompensate, Allison suggested. Maybe, I said, though I didn't believe it. My parents didn't overcompensate with kindness. They overcompensated with control. At 6 o'clock, I stood in front of my full-length mirror. I had chosen a deep blue dress that I loved, sleek and professional, but per my mother's instructions. I had curled my hair and put on more makeup than I usually wore. I looked like a porcelain doll version of myself. I looked like the daughter they wanted me to be. I drove to the Crescent Room with the radio off, needing the silence to steady my nerves. The restaurant was the crown jewel of Brookridge dining, a cavernous space of dark wood, velvet drapes, and chandeliers that probably cost more than my car. It was the kind of place where the air conditioning was always set to a brisk chill, and the waiters moved with the silent efficiency of assassins. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the size of the gathering. My parents had not booked a private room. They had taken over a long, rectangular table right in the center of the main dining floor. It was a position of maximum visibility. There were balloons tied to the chairs, silver and gold. There was a large projection screen set up on a tripod at the head of the table, currently displaying a looping slideshow of my childhood photos. I watched a grainy image of myself as a toddler, looking startled in a sandbox, fade into a picture of me at graduation, looking exhausted in a cap and gown. There she is, my father boomed. He stood up from the head of the table, arms wide, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch to the hilt. He was wearing his best suit, a silk handkerchief tucked into the pocket. He looked like a man who had just closed a major deal. "Happy birthday." "Darling," my mother cried, rushing over to kiss the air next to my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray. She gripped my shoulders, her fingers digging in slightly. "You look acceptable. I am glad you wore the blue." "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. I looked down the table. It was packed. My Aunt Sarah was there, waving enthusiastically. Two of my cousins, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, were texting under the table. To my horror, I saw Marcus and Ben from my office seated near the end, looking slightly out of place in their business casual attire among my family's Sunday best, and there was Allison, sitting next to Ben, giving me a supportive thumbs up. "We have quite the crowd," I said, my voice tight. "Only the best for our girl," my father said, guiding me to the seat of honor. "We wanted everyone to be here, to witness the celebration." I sat down, feeling the eyes of the entire restaurant on me. The Crescent Room was busy. There were couples on dates, business dinners, and families celebrating anniversaries. My eyes wandered to a table a few yards away, separate from our party, but close enough to overhear everything. There were 3 women sitting there. One of them caught my attention immediately. She was dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer, her dark hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. She had a leather portfolio bag resting against the leg of her chair, which seemed odd for a Saturday night dinner. She wasn't talking to her friends. She was watching me. Her gaze was intense, analytical. It wasn't the casual glance of a stranger checking out a birthday party. It felt like she was studying me. When our eyes met, she didn't look away immediately. She held my gaze for a heartbeat, her expression unreadable, but strangely serious. Before she turned back to her menu, I shivered and turned back to my family. Tyler was sitting across from me. He was wearing a shirt that was slightly too tight, and he had a smirk plastered on his face that I wanted to slap off. He raised his beer glass in a mock salute. "Happy 3-0. Jules," he said. "You made it." "Thanks. Tyler," I said. "Did you bring your checkbook?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I stiffened. "Don't start." He laughed. A sharp, barking sound. "Relax. I am kidding. Although, after tonight, you might wish you had just given me the cash." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, winking at our mother. "Just that we have a really special night planned. You will never forget this birthday. I promise you that." Dinner was an exercise in endurance. The waiters brought out course after course scallops, filet mignon, truffled potatoes. My father held court, telling stories about my childhood that were exaggerated for comedic effect. He told the table about how clumsy I was as a child, how I never had any rhythm, how I was always so different from the rest of the Morgans. She was always such a serious little thing. My mother chimed in, sipping her 3rd glass of wine. Tyler was the wild one, full of life, but Julia was always watching, calculating. I was just quiet, Mom, I murmured, cutting my steak. You were distinct, my father corrected. That is the word, distinct. I felt a nudge under the table. It was Allison, who had managed to switch seats to be next to me. You doing okay? She whispered. I want to crawl into a hole, I whispered back. Why are they acting like this? They are so manic. It is weird. Allison agreed, glancing at my parents. They look like they are sitting on a secret. As the dinner plates were cleared, the atmosphere at the table tightened. The casual chatter died down. My parents stopped eating and started exchanging those looks again, excited, expectant glances. My father checked his watch. My mother smoothed the tablecloth, her hands trembling slightly with anticipation. Is it time? Richard, she asked. I think it is, he said. He picked up his spoon and tapped it against his champagne flute. Ding, ding, ding. The sound cut through the noise of the restaurant like a knife. Attention, my father boomed. Standing up again. Attention. Everyone. The room fell silent. The jazz music seemed to fade into the background. At the nearby table, the woman with the portfolio turned in her chair to face us fully. We are coming to the end of the meal, my father announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. But before we cut the cake, we have a little presentation, a special surprise for Julia. Tyler snickered into his hand. My mother reached under her chair and pulled out a sleek, rigid box. I looked at the box. I looked at the smirk on Tyler's face. I looked at the manic gleam in my father's eyes. And suddenly, the knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. You will never forget this birthday, Tyler had said. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white, as the waiter approached with a cake that suddenly looked less like a celebration and more like a verdict. I tried to force a laugh, to play along with whatever game this was, but the sound died in my throat. I didn't know what was in that box, but I knew, with a terrifying instinct, that it was going to hurt. I looked at my mother, silently begging her to stop, but she just smiled a wide, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. Get the camera ready. Tyler, she said, we want to capture her reaction. The waiter placed the cake in the center of the table. It was a monstrosity of vanilla buttercream and raspberry filling. The words, Happy 30th Birthday, Julia scripted across the top in looping, sugary icing. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the white tablecloth. But no one was singing. The air in the crescent room had grown thick, heavy with a silence that felt less like anticipation and more like the drop in pressure before a tornado touches down. My father, Richard, remained standing. He held his champagne flute in one hand and a silver spoon in the other, tapping them together with a rhythmic, insistent clink, clink, clink that demanded total submission from the room. Thank you, everyone, he said, his voice booming with a theatrical projection that reached the far corners of the restaurant. Thank you for being here to celebrate our Julia. He looked down at me. His eyes were bright, almost feverish. There was no warmth in them, only the glittering intensity of a man who is about to deliver a punchline he has been rehearsing for weeks. You know, he continued, gesturing vaguely to the guests, every family has its inside jokes, its little mysteries, and for the Morgans, the biggest mystery has always been Julia. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the table. My Aunt Sarah smiled uncertainly, glancing between me and my father. I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap, my fingernails digging into my palms. It is true, my mother, Elaine, chimed in. She was beaming, her face flushed with wine and adrenaline. We have always said it, haven't we? She doesn't have the Morgan nose, she doesn't have the chin. And she certainly doesn't have the sense of humor. Or the work ethic, Tyler shouted from across the table, raising his beer bottle. Exactly, my father laughed, though the sound was hard and sharp. So, for her 30th birthday, a milestone year, we decided it was time to put the rumors to rest. We wanted to give Julia a gift that offers clarity, a gift that finally settles the score. My stomach turned over. I looked at Allison, whose eyes were wide with alarm. She reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it hard. "Richard, maybe we should just cut the cake." My boss, Marcus, suggested, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Even he, a man who thrived on corporate awkwardness, looked disturbed. "Nonsense," my father declared. "We are just getting to the good part." My mother reached for the glossy box she had placed on the table earlier. She stood up and walked around to my side, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She placed the box directly in front of me, her movements precise and deliberate. "Go on, Julia," she urged, her voice dripping with a faux sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Open it. It is the truth you have been looking for." I stared at the box. The red bow seemed to glare at me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the low murmur of the restaurant. I didn't want to touch it. I wanted to stand up, flip the table, and run. But the social contract, the ingrained training of 30 years of compliance kept me glued to my chair. I reached out with trembling fingers and pulled the ribbon. It fell away. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry. There was no keepsake. There was only a thick, folded packet of papers, stapled at the corner. Sitting on top of a colorful brochure for a commercial DNA testing service, the logo was a double helix in bright blue and green. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. A DNA kit. Was this their idea of a joke? A suggestion that I should find out my ancestry? "Pick it up," my father commanded. I lifted the papers. My eyes scanned the top page. It was a certificate of analysis, and there, printed in bold, black letters, was my name, Julia Morgan, and below it, the names of the individuals tested for comparison, Richard Morgan and Elaine Morgan. My breath hitched. I looked up at them, confusion warring with a rising tide of panic. "I don't understand. You took a test." "We all did," my mother said, her smile widening. "Months ago, remember when you came over for dinner and cut your finger chopping vegetables? I kept the tissue. It was easy enough to get a sample." I felt a wave of nausea. "You stole my blood." "We facilitated the truth," my father corrected. He reached over and snatched the papers from my hand before I could read further. "But let's skip to the findings. Shall we? I think the results are quite illuminating." He cleared his throat and held the document up, turning so that he was addressing not just our table, but the entire room. The restaurant had gone dead silent. Diners at other tables had stopped eating. The waiters were hovering by the kitchen doors, watching. "Test subject A, Julia Morgan," my father read aloud, his voice projecting like a town crier. "Relationship to test subject B, Richard Morgan. Probability of paternity, 0%. The silence in the room deepened, becoming a vacuum that sucked the air out of my lungs. "And," he continued, enjoying the dramatic pause, "relationship to test subject C, Elaine Morgan. Probability of maternity, 0%. He lowered the paper and looked at me with a triumphant sneer. 0%. "Julia, you are not a Morgan. You never were." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. I looked at the cake, at the flickering candles, at the faces of my relatives who were staring at me with a mixture of shock and pity. "Dad, this isn't funny," I whispered. "Stop it." "Funny," my father laughed. "I think it is hilarious. We have been feeding you, clothing you, and putting up with your moods for 30 years, and it turns out you are just some random stray." "Maybe the hospital sent us home with the wrong kid," Tyler shouted, laughing so hard he nearly choked on his drink. "I always knew you were a defects return." "That is enough." Allison stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You are sick, both of you." "Sit down, young lady," my mother snapped, her eyes flashing. "This is a family matter." "You are making it a public spectacle," Allison yelled back. "Because the truth deserves to be heard," my mother retorted. She turned back to me, her face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. "You have been walking around with your nose in the air, judging us, refusing to help your brother, acting like you are so much better than this family. Well, guess what? Julia, You are right. You aren't part of this family. The science proves it. I reached for the papers again, desperate to see them, to prove this was a mistake, a prank, anything other than reality. Give that to me, I said, my voice shaking. Let me see it. My mother yanked them back, clutching them to her chest. Oh, no, you don't get to hide this. Everyone deserves to know that your coldness, your selfishness, it is genetic. It is because you came from somewhere else entirely. I looked around the room. Frantic. People were watching. They were openly staring. At the table near the window, a man was holding up his phone. The camera lens pointed directly at me. Another woman 2 tables over was recording. I was being filmed. This nightmare was being documented. Please, I begged, tears spilling over my cheeks. Mom, Dad, please stop. People are recording. Let them record, my father declared, spreading his arms. Let the world know that Richard and Elaine Morgan are saints for taking in a child that wasn't even theirs. We raised you. We saved you from God knows what. My cousin, David, who was sitting at the far end of the table, stood up. He looked pale. Uncle Richard, this is too much. You can't do this here. It is none of your business. David, my mother hissed, spinning on him. Sit down and shut up. You don't know what we have been through with her. She is your daughter, David argued. Biological or not. You raised her. We housed her, my father corrected coldly. There is a difference. I felt physically sick. The bile rose in my throat. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold my shattering body together. The cruelty was so absolute, so calculated. They had planned this. They had ordered the kit, waited for the results, booked the restaurant, and invited an audience. They had set the stage to destroy me. At the table to my left, the woman with the sharp bob and the leather portfolio, Lydia, was motionless. She wasn't recording. She was staring at the cake. I saw her gaze shift from the icing script Julia Morgan down to a file folder that was partially open in her lap. I saw her flip a page, her eyes darting back and forth between the document and me. Her expression was not one of amusement or pity. It was one of intense, calculating shock. She looked like someone who had just found a missing puzzle piece in the middle of a war zone. She whispered something to the woman next to her, pointing discreetly at me, but I couldn't hear what she said over the rushing of blood in my ears. I don't believe you, I managed to say, my voice cracking. I have your eyes, Dad. People always say I have your eyes. Contacts, Tyler suggested, smirking. Plastic surgery. Who knows what you really are? We checked the medical records, my father said, waving the packet, or rather, the lack of them. It seems our memories of your birth were a little fuzzy, but the DNA doesn't lie. Julia, you are a biological stranger. Then who am I? I whispered. The question hung in the air. Fragile and terrifying. That is not our problem anymore, is it? My mother said, shrugging. She picked up her wineglass and took a long sip, looking at me over the rim with dead, shark-like eyes. We did our duty. We got you to 30. Now, you are on your own. You should be grateful, my father added, leaning in. Most people would have thrown you back. The humiliation was complete. It washed over me like a tidal wave of ice water. I looked at the faces of the strangers in the restaurant, the shock, the disgust, the morbid curiosity. I was stripped bare. My history, my identity, my name, it had all been ripped away in the span of 5 minutes, leaving me exposed and trembling in a blue dress that suddenly felt like a shroud. I have to go, I choked out. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I bumped the table, causing the silverware to rattle. Running away again, my mother called out, her voice mocking. Just like you ran away from helping your brother. Julia, wait, Allison cried, grabbing her purse. I didn't wait. I couldn't. I turned and fled. I pushed past the chairs, brushing against the shoulders of strangers who recoiled as if my shame were contagious. I kept my head down, tears blinding me, stumbling toward the exit. The journey to the door felt like miles. I could feel the eyes on my back, the heat of the camera lenses, the weight of the whispers. "Is that real?" I heard someone ask. "That is brutal," another voice muttered. I burst through the heavy double doors of the restaurant and out into the cool night air. The valet stand was empty. I didn't care about my car. I just needed to get away. I walked rapidly down the sidewalk, my heels clicking unevenly on the concrete. I made it about 50 feet before my legs gave out. I collapsed against the brick wall of a neighboring building, sliding down until I was crouching on the pavement. I gasped for air, hyperventilating. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a vice. "I don't understand," I repeated, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I don't understand. I don't understand. How could they? How could anyone be this cruel, to raise a child for 30 years and then discard them like a piece of trash at a dinner party? The memories of my childhood, the coldness, the criticism, the feeling of never being good enough suddenly twisted into a new, horrific shape. They hadn't just been strict parents. They had been captors, resentful guardians watching a stranger grow up in their house. "Julia." I looked up through my tears. Allison was running toward me, her face pale with worry. Ben was right behind her, looking furious. Allison dropped to her knees beside me and wrapped her arms around me. "I have got you. I have got you. Just breathe." "They hate me, Al," I sobbed into her shoulder. "They really hate me." "They are monsters," Ben said, his voice shaking with rage. He was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. "I have never seen anything like that. That was psychotic." "I am not their daughter," I whispered, the reality hitting me again. "I am nobody." "You are Julia," Allison said firmly, pulling back to look me in the face. "You are Julia, and you are my best friend, and you are brilliant and kind. Biology doesn't change that." "It changes everything," I said, wiping my face. "It means my whole life was a lie." A sound of footsteps approached from the direction of the restaurant. I flinched, terrified that it was Tyler coming to twist the knife, but the gait was different, controlled, purposeful. I looked up. It was the woman from the restaurant, Lydia. She had her coat on now, and her leather portfolio was tucked under her arm. She stopped a few feet away, respecting our space but clearly intending to speak. Her expression was no longer analytical. It was softened by a genuine, profound concern. "I am sorry to intrude," she said, her voice low and calm. It was a lawyer's voice, steady, reassuring, authoritative. "Please, just leave her alone," Allison snapped, shielding me. "She has had enough for one night." "I know," the woman said. "I saw what happened. It was reprehensible." She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto mine. "My name is Lydia Parker. I am an attorney with Parker & Rowe." I stared at her, sniffing. "I don't need a lawyer. I don't have any money." "I am not soliciting business," Lydia said gently. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple white business card. She held it out, not to me, but to Allison, who took it hesitantly. "Julia," Lydia said, using my name with a familiarity that felt strange. "I was sitting near you. I couldn't help but overhear the announcement your father made." "Everyone heard it," I said bitterly. "Everyone in Brookridge probably knows by now." "Yes," Lydia said. "But I heard something else. I saw the name on the cake, and I heard the specific details about the DNA results." She paused, looking back toward the restaurant entrance as if checking to see if we were being followed. When she turned back, her face was grave. "I handle estate law and complex trusts," Lydia said carefully. "I have a client, a very wealthy, elderly woman who has been searching for a family member for a long time, a specific missing person case that has been cold for decades." I frowned, wiping my eyes. "What does that have to do with me?" Lydia hesitated. She seemed to be weighing her words, balancing her professional ethics against the human tragedy she had just witnessed. "The name involved in my client's search is Morgan, and the timeline. It matches your age. Exactly. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What are you saying? I am saying that what happened in there, she gestured toward the restaurant, might not be the whole story. In fact, I suspect it is a very distorted version of the story. She looked at me with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. I think you and I need to talk. Not here, not tonight, but soon, very soon. Is this a joke? Ben asked, stepping forward protectively. Because if this is part of the show her parents put on, I assure you, I have never met Richard or Elaine Morgan, Lydia said coldly. And after what I just saw, I have no desire to. My loyalty is to the truth and to my client. She looked back at me. Julia, please call me. Tomorrow, even if it is just to ask questions, I think I have answers that you are going to need. She didn't wait for a response. She nodded to Allison, turned, and walked away down the street, disappearing into the shadows. I stared at the space where she had been. The card in Allison's hand seemed to vibrate with energy. What was that? Allison whispered. I don't know, I said. My head was pounding. We need to get you home, Ben said. My car is right here. Come on. They helped me up. My legs were still shaky, but the shock was beginning to give way to a cold, hard numbness. I let them guide me toward the parking lot, but as we passed the front of the restaurant, the heavy doors swung open as a couple exited, looking disturbed, through the open gap. The sounds of the dining room spilled out. The silence had broken, replaced by the loud, buzzing murmur of gossip. But cutting through it all was my brother's voice, loud and unmistakable. I stopped, freezing in place. Oh, come on. Mom, don't be upset, Tyler was saying. I could picture him leaning back in his chair, swirling his beer. You finally got rid of the charity case. We should be celebrating. Think of the money you will save now that you don't have to pretend to give a damn. She was always so dramatic. My mother's voice floated out, shrill and defensive. Look at the scene she caused, overreacting as usual. We were the victims here, really, having to raise a stranger's child. Exactly, my father agreed. Ungrateful, simply ungrateful. Ben moved to slam the door shut, cutting off their voices. But the damage was done. The words seared into my brain. Charity case, overreacting, victim. I looked at Ben. His jaw was clenched so hard, a muscle was jumping in his cheek. Did you hear that? I whispered. I heard it, Ben said darkly. And so did the people at the next table. I saw them recording it. Julia, Tyler just dug his own grave. Let's go, Allison said, pulling me toward the car. Don't listen to them. They are dead to you. I got into the back seat of Ben's car and curled into a ball. As we pulled away from the Crescent Room, watching the warm glow of the windows recede into the distance, I realized that Allison was wrong. They weren't dead to me. They were something much worse. They were my enemies. And for the first time in my life, as I stared at the dark streets of Brookridge passing by, I didn't feel the urge to please them. I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I felt a tiny, flickering spark of something that felt like hate, and underneath it, fueled by the mysterious woman with the leather portfolio, a burning need to know who I really was. Test subject A, I whispered to the darkness. What? Allison asked from the front seat. Nothing, I said, closing my eyes. Just driving. The night was far from over, but the party the fake. Curated life of Julia Morgan was officially dead. What came next was terrifying. But at least, for the first time, it would be real. Sunday morning arrived like a physical blow. The sunlight streaming through my bedroom window felt aggressive, too bright and too cheerful for the wreckage that was my life. I woke up with a pounding headache, the kind that usually follows a night of heavy drinking, but I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol after fleeing the restaurant. This was an emotional hangover, a dehydration of the spirit that left me feeling brittle and hollow. I rolled over, shielding my eyes, and stared at the empty side of the bed. For a terrifying second, I forgot. I had a split second of peace where I was just Julia Morgan. project coordinator, daughter of Richard and Elaine, sister of Tyler. Then the memory of the Crescent Room crashed down on me. The clink of the spoon against the glass, the red bow on the box, the way my father's voice boomed 0%, the laughter. I curled into a ball, pulling the duvet over my head, wishing I could dissolve into the mattress. I checked my phone. It was 9 in the morning. There were 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from Tyler, and a string of texts from relatives that I couldn't bring myself to open. I needed to call work. I couldn't face spreadsheets today. I couldn't face Marcus. I dialed my boss's number. He answered on the second ring, sounding harried. "Marcus," I said, my voice rasping. "It is Julia. I am not coming in tomorrow. Or today. I mean, Monday." "Julia," Marcus asked. "You sound terrible. Is this about the birthday thing Ben mentioned there was some family drama?" "I am sick," I said, and it wasn't a lie. "I need a personal day. Maybe 2. "Fine," Marcus said, surprisingly clipped. "But the Henderson files are due Tuesday. Don't leave me hanging." "I won't," I said, and hung up. I lay there for an hour, staring at the ceiling. I felt numb, a strange, floaty sensation that disconnected me from my own limbs. I kept replaying the scene at the restaurant, looking for the glint of a joke, a sign that it was all a misunderstanding. But every time I replayed it, the cruelty sharpened. They hadn't just told me I was adopted. They had staged a public execution of my identity. My eyes drifted to the nightstand. The white business card lay there, stark against the dark wood. Lydia Parker, attorney at law, Parker and Rowe. I reached for it, turning it over in my fingers. Part of me wanted to tear it up. Reaching out to this woman felt like a betrayal. The final nail in the coffin of the family I had spent 30 years trying to please. If I called her, I was admitting that the Morgans were gone. I was admitting that I was truly alone. But another part of me, the part that had seen the cold calculation in my mother's eyes, knew that I had no choice. The buzzer to my apartment rang, startling me. I ignored it. It rang again, long and insistent. Then my phone buzzed. Opened the door. "Jules. I have bagels and I'm not leaving." It was Allison. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on a robe, and buzzed her in. When I opened my apartment door, Allison was standing there with a large paper bag and 2 coffees in a cardboard carrier. She took one look at me, my swollen eyes, my matted hair, and her expression softened into heartbreaking pity. "Okay," she said, walking in and kicking the door shut behind her. "We are doing this. Breakfast first, crisis management second." She steered me to the small table in my kitchen. She unpacked cream cheese, bagels, and fruit. She put a coffee in my hand. The warmth of the cup was the first thing I had felt all morning. "I can't eat," I said. "You have to," Allison said, sitting opposite me. "You need strength." I took a sip of the coffee. "Did you see the video?" Allison winced. "I saw a clip. It is circulating on local Facebook groups. The comments are, well, they are on your side. Julia. Everyone thinks your parents are psychopaths." "They aren't my parents," I whispered. The words tasted like ash. "They made that very clear." "They raised you," Allison said fiercely. "That makes them parents. It just makes them terrible ones." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You didn't see their faces. Al, they were relieved. They looked like they were finally taking out the trash. That is what I was to them. A 30-year obligation they finally paid off." I put the cup down, my hands trembling. I always felt it. You know, that I had to earn my place, that if I wasn't perfect, if I didn't get straight A's, if I didn't smile enough, they would send me back. I thought it was just anxiety. I thought I was crazy. I looked at her, tears spilling over. But it was real. Their love was conditional. It was a rental agreement, and the lease just expired. "That is emotional cruelty," Allison said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. "It is not honesty. It is abuse. And what they did last night, that was a calculated attack. Normal people don't ambush their daughter with DNA results in a crowded restaurant. I don't know who I am, I said, my voice cracking. If I am not a Morgan, then who am I? Where did I come from? Did someone give me up? Was I unwanted from the start? Allison tapped the business card that I had brought out to the kitchen table. There is one person who thinks she knows, Allison said. Lydia, I stared at the card. What if she is crazy too? What if this is just another layer of the nightmare? She is a partner at Parker and Rowe, Allison said. I looked her up this morning. She is legitimate. She handles high-stakes estate litigation. She isn't chasing ambulances, and she isn't crazy. I took a deep breath. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but the need for answers was stronger. I picked up my phone. Do it, Allison whispered. I dialed the number on the card. It rang twice. Lydia Parker, a voice answered. It was calm, professional, and instantly recognizable. Hi, I said, my voice shaking. This is Julia Morgan, or whoever I am. Julia, Lydia said. Her tone shifted, becoming warmer, more urgent. I was hoping you would call. Are you safe? Are you okay? I am safe, I said. I want to know what you know. I can't discuss the details over the phone, Lydia said. But I can make time for you today. Can you come to my office, say, 2 o'clock? I will be there, I said. The offices of Parker and Rowe were located in a glass and steel tower in the financial district of Brookridge. It was a world away from the chaotic energy of my marketing firm. The lobby was hushed, smelled of expensive leather and old money, and the receptionist looked like she had been sculpted out of marble. I arrived at 10 minutes to 2. I had showered and dressed in a pair of slacks and a sweater, trying to arm myself with a semblance of professionalism. Allison had offered to come up, but I asked her to wait in the coffee shop across the street. I needed to do this alone. Lydia Parker met me in the waiting area. She looked different than she had at the restaurant, less severe, more human. She wore a tailored suit and glasses, but her eyes were kind. Julia, she said, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. I shook her hand. I didn't have much else to do today. She led me down a long corridor lined with abstract art to a corner office with a view of the city. It was an intimidating space, filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and stacked files, but it felt oddly safe. It was a place of logic, of laws and facts. Please, sit, Lydia said, gesturing to a velvet armchair. She sat behind her desk and folded her hands. I want to start by saying how sorry I am for what you endured last night. I have seen many family disputes in my career, but that was unique. They wanted to hurt me, I said bluntly. Yes, Lydia said. It appeared so, but their cruelty may have inadvertently done you a favor. It brought you to my attention. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file folder. She placed it on the desk, but didn't open it yet. I need to explain my position, Lydia began. I represent the estate of Eleanor Hawthorne. Mrs. Hawthorne is 82 years old. She is currently in hospice care at the Whispering Pines facility here in the city. Hawthorne, I repeated. The name sounded vaguely familiar, likely from the society pages or a hospital wing donor list. They are wealthy, aren't they? Extremely, Lydia said. But wealth does not insulate one from tragedy. 30 years ago, Eleanor's only daughter, Claire Hawthorne, was pregnant. It was a difficult pregnancy. Claire was young, unmarried, and there were complications. Lydia leaned forward. Claire gave birth at a private clinic in upstate New York. It was a discreet facility, the kind that catered to wealthy families who wanted to keep things quiet. The records state that Claire died of a hemorrhage shortly after delivery. It was devastating for Eleanor. And the baby? I asked, feeling a cold prickle on my arms. The clinic informed Eleanor that the baby had also died, Lydia said. Respiratory failure. They told her the infant was cremated along with the mother, per standard protocol for that specific facility. Okay, I said, my mouth dry. So the baby died. Eleanor never believed it, Lydia said quietly. She was in shock, grieving her daughter, and she let the doctors handle everything. But for decades, she has been haunted by the lack of a death certificate for the child. The clinic closed down 5 years later due to malpractice suits. The records were scattered or destroyed. Lydia tapped the file. About 10 years ago, Eleanor hired my firm to launch a private inquiry. We didn't find much at first, but technology has improved. 2 years ago, we authorized a forensic genealogist to run a search through commercial DNA databases, the kind where people upload their results to find distant cousins. My heart skipped a beat. I never took a test, until whatever my parents did. No, Lydia agreed, but a second cousin of yours did, on the Hawthorne side. We found a partial match to a user profile that had been uploaded anonymously, linked to a family tree that included the surname Morgan in Brookridge. I frowned. I don't understand. The match wasn't you, Lydia clarified. It was a distant relative who shared enough markers to narrow down the search. We identified a potential link to a child born in October of 1994, living in Brookridge under the name Julia Morgan. October, I whispered. My birthday is October 14th. We tried to contact your parents, Lydia said, her voice hardening slightly. We sent certified letters. We made phone calls. We were trying to verify if you were adopted, if there was any chance you were the missing Hawthorne child. We were met with silence. The letters were returned as undeliverable, or we were told by a lawyer representing the Morgans to cease and desist. I sat back, stunned. They knew someone was looking for me. They knew someone was asking questions, Lydia said, and they blocked us at every turn. Because the clinic records were gone, and we had no court order. We couldn't force a DNA test. We were stuck, until last night. When you saw the cake? I said. When I saw the cake, Lydia nodded, and heard your father announce that you shared 0 DNA with him or his wife. And when I saw you, Julia, I have seen photos of Claire Hawthorne. The resemblance is striking. I put my hand to my forehead, trying to process the enormity of what she was saying. So you think my parents, Richard and Elaine, acquired me from this clinic? I think it is a very strong possibility, Lydia said. I think they may have entered into a private adoption arrangement, possibly an illegal one, with the doctor at that clinic. They took a baby that the grandmother was told had died. Oh my God, I breathed. Whatever the specific mechanics were, Lydia said, it seems they have known for a long time that you were not theirs biologically, but the fact that they hid the inquiries from the Hawthorne estate suggests they were hiding the truth of how they got you. Why tell me now? I asked, tears springing to my eyes. Why destroy me at a restaurant if they fought so hard to keep me? That, Lydia said, is the question. Maybe they felt you were becoming too independent. Maybe there was a financial trigger. Or maybe they just got tired of the lie. She pushed the file toward me. I cannot confirm anything 100% without a direct DNA comparison between you and Eleanor Hawthorne, but based on what I heard last night, and what is in this file, I believe you are Eleanor's granddaughter. I stared at the folder. It looked like a bomb that was waiting to detonate. What do I do? I asked. First, Lydia said, we need science. I want you to take an independent DNA test, not one from a packet your mother handed you. A legal grade test. I can arrange it, or you can use a commercial kit to start. Second, you need to request your birth records from the state. If my theory is correct, your birth certificate might be irregular, delayed filing, or signed by a doctor who is no longer practicing. And my parents, I asked, do I talk to them? Lydia hesitated. You can try, but be careful. If they did obtain you illegally, they are protecting themselves from criminal liability. They might lie. They might destroy evidence. I have to know, I said, standing up. I have to ask them. Julia, Lydia warned, standing up as well. If you are the Hawthorne heir, there is a significant trust involved. Money changes people. It makes them dangerous. Your parents, the Morgans, might have used that trust, or they might be afraid of losing their assets if they are sued for fraud. They called me a charity case, I said, remembering Tyler's words. They said I should be grateful. Go home, Lydia said gently. Order the test. Look for your papers, but do not trust them to tell you the truth. I left the law firm in a daze. The city noises, the traffic, the sirens, the chatter of pedestrians felt muffled, as if I were underwater. I met Allison at the coffee shop and told her everything. She listened, her mouth hanging open, her coffee forgotten. This is a movie, she said. This is literally a movie plot, a missing heiress, a dead clinic. It explains so much, I said, staring out the window. Why there are no pictures of my mom pregnant, why I look nothing like them, why they were always so weird about my medical history. You have to call them, Allison said. You have to confront them. I waited until I was back in the safety of my apartment. I sat on my sofa, staring at the phone. It was 5 p.m. My parents would be home, probably drinking wine, probably congratulating themselves on a job well done. I dialed the landline. It was a reflex. I knew they always picked up the landline. Hello? My mother's voice. It was crisp, annoyed. It is me, I said. There was a pause. Well, you finally decided to call. Are you done throwing your tantrum? The audacity took my breath away. My tantrum. You humiliated me in front of 30 people. We told the truth, Elaine snapped. You should appreciate that. We stopped living a lie. I just came from a lawyer, I said. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. The line went dead silent. A lawyer. Elaine's voice went up a pitch. What do you mean, a lawyer? Lydia Parker, I said. She was at the restaurant. She represents Eleanor Hawthorne. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, then muffled whispering. My father's voice came on the line, loud and aggressive. Julia, what is this nonsense? Did you steal me? I asked, my voice trembling but loud. Did you take me from a clinic in New York? Is that why you never talk about my birth? You are hysterical, Richard shouted. You are making up drama, just like always. We took you in. We saved you. Saved me from what? I demanded. From my grandmother, who thought I was dead. You are ungrateful, he yelled. We gave you a home. We gave you a name. And now you are running to strangers. You are choosing strangers over your real family. You just told me you aren't my real family, I screamed back. You gave me a DNA test that said 0%. You can't have it both ways, Dad. Don't call me Dad, he spat. If you are going to sue us, if you are going to listen to some ambulance chaser, then don't you dare call me Dad. You are on your own. Julia, just like we said, don't come to the house. Don't ask for money. I don't want your money, I said. I want my birth certificate. I want the truth. You want the truth. Richard laughed. A cruel, grating sound. The truth is you were unwanted, and you are proving why right now. Click, the line went dead. I sat there, holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. I wasn't crying. The tears had dried up. In their place was a cold, hard rage. They were scared. I could hear it in their aggression. They were terrified. Lydia was right. I spent the rest of the evening in a frenzy of activity. I went online and ordered the most expensive, expedited DNA kit I could find. Then, I went to my closet. I kept a plastic bin on the top shelf with my important documents, my passport, my social security card, my lease. But buried at the bottom was a dusty manila envelope my mother had given me when I moved out. She had labeled it Julia's papers in her perfect cursive script. I dumped the contents onto the living room floor. Allison sat cross-legged beside me, sorting through the pile. Okay, Allison said. Passport, social security card, high school diploma. Where is the birth certificate? I asked, shuffling through the papers. Here, Allison said, handing me a certified copy. I looked at it. It was a standard state of Ohio birth certificate, Julia Marie Morgan, date of birth, October 14th, 1994, place of birth, Brookridge General Hospital, Mother Elaine Morgan, Father Richard Morgan. It looks real, I said, feeling a sink of disappointment. If I was adopted, wouldn't it say amended, or wouldn't they have an adoption decree? Not if they falsified it, Allison pointed out. Lydia said the clinic might have been illegal. If a doctor signed a birth certificate saying you were born to Elaine, the state wouldn't know the difference. I kept digging. There were old report cards, a few drawings I had made in kindergarten, and then a small yellow card, my vaccination record. I opened it. It was filled with dates and doctors' signatures. DTP vaccine, polio vaccine. My eyes scanned the dates. The first entry was for a hepatitis B shot. The date written next to it was October 12, 1994. I stared at it. I blinked and looked again. Al, I said, look at this. Allison leaned over. What? My birth certificate says I was born October 14th, I said, pointing to the official document, but my vaccination card says I got my first shot on October 12th. Allison gasped. You were vaccinated 2 days before you were born. That is impossible, I said. Unless you were actually born earlier. Allison finished. And they changed the date on the birth certificate to match when they got you, or to hide your identity. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was a small error, a slip of the pen by a nurse or a doctor 30 years ago, but it was the crack in the foundation. It was the proof that the paper reality Richard and Elaine had built for me was a lie. And look at the location, I said, squinting at the faint stamp next to the signature on the vaccine card. It didn't say Brookridge Pediatrics. It said C.H. Medical Services. C.H., Allison whispered. Claire Hawthorne. Or the clinic name, I said. But it is not Brookridge. I sat back, clutching the yellow card. The room felt smaller, the air tighter, the parents I had cried over, the parents I had tried to please, the parents who had mocked me at my birthday dinner. They were strangers. They were kidnappers. Or buyers. They lied about everything, I said, my voice steady. My birthday, my name, my medical history. What are you going to do? Allison asked. I looked at the pile of papers, at the lying birth certificate, and then at the truthful little yellow card. I am going to burn their house down, I said. Allison looked alarmed. Metaphorically, I clarified, though the fire in my chest felt very real. I am going to get that DNA test. I am going to give Lydia everything she needs, and I am going to take back whatever they stole from me. Allison reached out and squeezed my shoulder. I am staying tonight. You shouldn't be alone. Thank you, I said. We ordered pizza, but I didn't eat much. I spent the night staring at the wall. While Allison slept on the couch, my mind was racing, connecting dots that had been invisible yesterday. The lack of baby photos, the way my mother never wanted to talk about her labor, the way they isolated me from extended family. It wasn't just that I didn't belong, it was that I was evidence. I was a crime scene they had been living in for 30 years, and now the crime scene was waking up. Around 3 a.m, I walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping city of Brookridge. Somewhere out there, in a hospice facility called Whispering Pines, was a woman named Eleanor Hawthorne, a grandmother who had been told I was Ash. I am coming, I whispered to the glass. I turned back to the room. The childhood journal I had written in for years lay on the coffee table. I picked it up and opened it to a fresh page. Day 1, I wrote, My name is Julia. I don't know the rest yet, but I'm going to find out. I closed the book. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't the fear of a child afraid of being rejected. It was the fear of a soldier going into battle. My parents wanted a stranger. They were about to get one. The waiting was a distinct kind of torture. It was a silent, suffocating limbo that stretched over 3 weeks, a period where I felt less like a person and more like a ghost haunting my own life. I went to work, I bought groceries, I paid my bills, but underneath the routine, I was vibrating with a constant, low-level frequency of dread. My phone had become a device of harassment. Richard and Elaine. I could no longer bring myself to call them Mom and Dad alternated their tactics with dizzying speed. One day, the messages would be blistering, filled with accusations of betrayal. You have embarrassed this family beyond repair. Richard texted on a Tuesday afternoon. After everything we did for you, to run off and play the victim is beneath you. The next day, the tone would shift to a cloying, gaslighting concern. We are just worried about your mental state. Elaine would write, we told you the truth for your own good. We wanted you to be free of the questions you have always had. Why are you punishing us for being honest? I didn't reply to any of them. I let the messages pile up, a digital archive of their dysfunction. I saved every single one, not because I wanted to read them, but because Lydia had told me to. Documentation is armor, she had said during one of our brief check-in calls. Don't delete anything. In the second week, the private humiliation of the Crescent Room went public. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance. When my phone pinged with a notification from a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, it was a link to a video on a popular social media platform. Accompanied by the message, "Is this you? I am so sorry." My stomach dropped. I clicked the link. The video was grainy, shot from a cell phone at a neighboring table, but the audio was crystal clear. I watched, horrified, as a shaky zoom captured my father standing over me, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer. Relationship to test. Subject B. Richard Morgan, probability of paternity. 0%. The video cut to my mother yanking the papers away from me. It captured the laughter of my relatives. It captured Tyler's voice jeering about the hospital sending the wrong kid. And it captured me, looking small and shattered in my blue dress, begging them to stop. The caption read, "Parents reveal daughter is adopted as a prank at her 30th birthday dinner." Watch the cruelty. I scrolled down to the comments. There were thousands of them. I braced myself for mockery, for the internet to tell me I was overreacting. Instead, I found a wall of outrage. This is emotional abuse, plain and simple. One user wrote, "Who does this to their child? Look at her face. She is devastated." Wrote another, "Narcissists love an audience." A third comment read, "They wanted to break her in public so she couldn't fight back." I sat there, tears pricking my eyes. For 30 years, I had been told that I was the sensitive one, the dramatic one, the one who couldn't take a joke. I had believed that my pain was a defect in my character. But here were thousands of strangers, people who owed me nothing, validating a reality I had been too afraid to claim. It wasn't me. It was them. I felt exposed. Yes, the idea that thousands of people were watching my worst moment was mortifying, but strangely, I also felt lighter. The secret was out. The gaslighting couldn't work if the whole world saw the truth. Julia. I jumped, minimizing the browser window. Ben was standing at the entrance to my cubicle, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He looked tired, his shirt sleeves rolled up, but his expression was soft. "Hey," I said, wiping my eyes. "I am working on the Henderson report. I promise." "I don't care about the report," Ben said. He walked in and set one of the mugs on my desk. "I saw the video. It is everywhere." I flinched. "I know. I am sorry." "It is humiliating for the firm. I can talk to Marcus if he wants me to resign." "Resign." Ben looked at me like I was insane. "Julia, nobody wants you to resign. We want to know if you are okay." He pulled up a chair and sat down. "I was there, so I knew it was bad. But seeing it on video, hearing the way your brother spoke to you," he shook his head. "That isn't normal family drama. That is cruelty." I looked at him. In the 5 years we had worked together, we had mostly talked about deadlines and office politics. I had never told him about the way my mother critiqued my weight, or the way my father made me feel like an investment that hadn't paid off. "I thought it was," I admitted quietly. "I thought everyone's parents were like that. I thought I just wasn't good enough to earn their kindness." "You are the kindest person in this office," Ben said firmly. "You cover for people. You remember everyone's birthday. You stay late to fix mistakes you didn't make. You have spent your whole life trying to earn love that you shouldn't have to buy. I looked down at the coffee, the steam swirling up. They made me feel like I was lucky they kept me, like I was a rescue dog they regret adopting. Well, Ben said, now the world knows who the real animals are. He stood up and squeezed my shoulder. If you need anything, if you need to leave early, if you need someone to egg their house, I am in. I managed a weak laugh. Thanks, Ben. That afternoon, the email from the DNA lab arrived. I didn't open it at work. I drove straight to Lydia's office, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I hadn't told my parents I was taking the test. I hadn't told them anything. Lydia was waiting for me. We sat in her office, the city skyline gray and imposing behind her. She had her laptop open. Are you ready? She asked. Just tell me, I said. Lydia turned the screen toward me. The results were displayed in a clean, clinical font. Julia Morgan versus Richard Morgan. No match. Julia Morgan versus Elaine Morgan, no match. That part I expected. It was the confirmation of the void. But Lydia scrolled down. Julia Morgan versus Eleanor Hawthorne. Reference sample 26%. Shared DNA. 26%, Lydia said, her voice steady and professional. That is the range for a grandparent and grandchild, or a half-sibling. Given the timeline and Eleanor's history, it is conclusive in my eyes. You are Claire Hawthorne's daughter. You are Eleanor's granddaughter. I stared at the screen. The numbers were irrefutable. I wasn't a stray. I wasn't a mistake. I was a Hawthorne. I had a grandmother who had been looking for me. We have the proof, Lydia said, but we also found something else. She pulled a file from her desk. When we established the likelihood of your identity, I had my team look into the financial structures Eleanor set up 30 years ago. She created a trust. Julia, a massive one. It was called the Claire Hawthorne Memorial Trust, but the beneficiary was designated as the living issue of Claire Hawthorne, should the child be found. Okay, I said, trying to follow. Here is the interesting part, Lydia said, her eyes darkening. 7 years ago, there was activity on a dormant account linked to a subtrust in your name. Not the main Hawthorne fortune, but a smaller fund that was somehow accessed using your Social Security number and a guardianship decree. My Social Security number? I asked. Yes, Lydia said. I can't see the full transaction history without a subpoena, which we will get, but it looks like someone claimed guardianship of the lost funds by presenting legal custody of you. They didn't tell the Hawthorne estate they had found you. They just found a back door into the money that was set aside for your education and care. I felt the blood drain from my face. My parents. It fits the timeline, Lydia said. Did they ever come into a sudden amount of money about 7 years ago? I thought back. 7 years ago, I was 23. I was struggling to pay for my final year of college because my parents said they were cash poor. They refinanced the house 7 years ago, I said slowly. Or at least, they said they did. They did a huge renovation. They bought a boat. They bought Tyler a new car. And you, Lydia asked, did they pay for your school? No, I said. They told me to take out loans. They said it would build my character. Lydia's expression hardened into ice. They stole from you. Julia, if they accessed that trust, they committed fraud. They used the money meant for your future to fund their lifestyle, while burying you in debt. The anger that had been simmering in my gut for weeks suddenly crystallized. It wasn't hot anymore. It was cold. It was a glacier moving through my veins, unstoppable and crushing. I am going to see them, I said. Julia, be careful, Lydia warned. This shifts from emotional abuse to criminal conduct. They will be dangerous. I am going to see them, I repeated. And I'm going to record every word. Lydia nodded slowly. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a small, high-quality digital recorder. Use this. It is better than a phone. Keep it in your pocket. Do not let them know it is there. Get them to admit they knew who you were. Get them to admit the money. I drove to Willow Creek as the sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple, casting long shadows over the manicured lawns and perfect hedges of my childhood neighborhood. The house looked exactly the same as it always did, imposing, pristine, a monument to upper-middle-class respectability. I parked in the driveway. My hands were steady as I slipped the recorder into my blazer pocket and turned it on. I checked my purse for the folder Lydia had prepared copies of the DNA results and a printout of the trust fund existence. I walked to the front door and used my key. I didn't knock. I walked straight in. Richard and Elaine were in the living room, watching television. They looked up, startled, as I strode in. "Julia," Elaine said, standing up. She looked wary, her eyes darting to my hands. "We didn't know you were coming." "I am here," I said, my voice calm. "Well," Richard said, muttering as he muted the TV, "it is about time. Are you here to apologize for the scene you caused, or for the silent treatment?" "I am here to finish the conversation you started at the restaurant," I said. I remained standing, keeping my distance. "We have said everything we need to say," Elaine said, crossing her arms. "You aren't ours. We took you in. You were ungrateful. End of story." "Not quite," I said. I pulled the DNA papers from my bag and tossed them onto the coffee table. "I took my own test. It confirms I am not a Morgan, but it also confirms who I am." Richard glanced at the papers but didn't pick them up. "Does it matter? You are a 30-year-old woman. Julia, who cares where you came from?" "I am Eleanor Hawthorne's granddaughter," I said. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Elaine's face went paper white. Richard stiffened, his jaw clenching. "I don't know who that is," Richard said. But the lie was so lazy it was insulting. "Don't lie to me," I said sharply. "Not anymore. The DNA is a match. I know about the clinic. I know about the private arrangement." Elaine let out a small, strangled sound. She sank back onto the sofa, putting a hand to her mouth. "We weren't supposed to say anything," she whispered. "The doctor, he made us promise." "Shut up, Elaine," Richard snapped. "No," I said, stepping closer. "Keep talking. Elaine, you weren't supposed to say that you were hers," Elaine cried, tears leaking from her eyes. "Claire's, it was a mess. Julia, it was a tragedy. The mother died. The grandmother was wealthy and powerful. The doctor said the baby would be swallowed up by that family. He said you needed a normal home, a safe home. So you bought me," I asked, "like a used car." "We adopted you," Richard shouted, standing up to loom over me. "We paid the fees. We took the risk. It was a private placement. The doctor handled the paperwork. We saved you from a chaotic situation. You should be thanking us." "You didn't save me," I said. "You stole me. You let a grieving grandmother believe I was dead." "She would have spoiled you rotten," Richard yelled. "She would have turned you into a useless socialite. We gave you structure. We gave you values." "Values?" I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You humiliated me for sport. You treated me like a servant. You valued Tyler, the dropout, over me every single day." "Tyler is our blood," Richard roared. "Of course we prioritize him. That is biology. Julia, you can't fight biology." "And the money?" I asked quietly. Richard froze. "What money?" "The trust," I said. "The Claire Hawthorne Memorial Trust. The one set up for the baby you claimed was yours." Elaine looked at Richard, panic flaring in her eyes. "I told you," she hissed. "I told you she would find out." "You found it, didn't you?" I pressed, watching them carefully. 7 years ago, you found the account that was linked to my legal identity. You used your guardianship papers to access it. "It was reimbursement," Richard argued, his face turning a mottled red. "For raising you. Do you have any idea how expensive you were? Braces, clothes, food, camp. We spent a fortune on you. That money was ours by right. It was compensation for the burden of raising another woman's child. It was $300,000, I said, pulling the figure from the air, though Lydia had estimated it was likely more. It was more than that, Richard scoffed, falling into the trap. And every penny of it went into this house, into this family, into maintaining the standard of living you enjoyed. I enjoyed, I asked, my voice trembling with rage. You made me take out $50,000 in student loans. You told me you didn't have the money to help me. While you were sitting on my inheritance, we had to help Tyler, Elaine wailed. He was in trouble. He had debts. We couldn't let him go to jail. We used the money to fix things. It was family money. Julia, we used it for the family. But I am not family, am I? I said. You just said it. 0%. So you took money that belonged to a stranger, and you gave it to your son. We were your guardians, Richard shouted. It was our decision to make. You were a child. You didn't need that kind of cash. And when I started asking questions, I asked, when I wouldn't lend Tyler money last month, is that why you did it? Did you decide to destroy me publicly because you were afraid I was getting too close to the truth, or because you wanted to punish me for cutting off the cash flow? You were getting arrogant, Richard spat. You needed to be taken down a peg. We thought if we shamed you, if we made you feel small, you would stop asking questions. You would come crawling back, desperate to belong. I looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't powerful. They weren't scary. They were small, greedy, frantic people who had built a life on a foundation of theft and lies. You really don't get it, I said softly. You didn't take me down. You set me free. I turned to leave. Where are you going? Elaine called out, her voice rising in hysteria. You can't just leave. We are still your parents. Julia, we raised you. You were my jailers, I said, and my parole is up. If you tell anyone about the money, Richard threatened, stepping forward, I will deny it. I will say you are crazy. I will ruin you. I patted my pocket where the recorder was humming, capturing every syllable of his confession. You already tried to ruin me. Richard, I said. It didn't work. I walked out the front door. I walked down the driveway. I got into my car. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't look back at the house. I drove. I drove straight to Lydia's office. It was late, past 8 in the evening, but she had told me to come back immediately. She buzzed me in. I walked into her office and placed the recorder on her desk. Did you get it? Lydia asked. Everything, I said. The clinic, the private arrangement, and the money. Richard admitted they took it. He admitted they used it to refinance the house and bail out Tyler. He called it reimbursement. Lydia plugged the recorder into her computer and put on headphones. She listened for a few minutes, her expression shifting from focused to stunned to grimly satisfied. She took the headphones off. This is it, Julia. This is the smoking gun. What does it mean? I asked, sinking into the chair. I felt exhausted, hollowed out. It means we have them on fraud, Lydia said. Conversion of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and with the admission about the clinic. We have grounds to open an investigation into the adoption itself. This isn't just a civil suit anymore. This could be criminal. She looked at me. I can file a petition tomorrow to freeze their assets. We can demand a full accounting of the trust. We can sue for the return of the funds, plus punitive damages for the emotional distress and the public defamation. Do it, I said. Freeze everything. It will be a war, Lydia warned. They will fight dirty. They will try to smear you in the press again. Let them try, I said. I have the truth now. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The silence was different than before. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of aftermath. The battle was joined. The bridges were burned. I picked up my childhood journal again. I flipped back through the years, reading the entries of a 10-year-old girl, a 16-year-old girl, a 20-year-old woman. December 12th, 2004. Mom got mad because I didn't want to play soccer like Tyler. She said I was being difficult on purpose. I tried to explain I like reading, but she just sighed and said I was boring. June 4th, 2010. Dad said I shouldn't apply to the art program. He said it was a waste of money and I should do something practical so I can support myself, because they won't be around forever. He never says that to Tyler. October 14th, 2015. My 21st birthday. They forgot. They called 2 days later and said they were busy with the renovation. I cried in the dorm room. I feel like I don't belong in this family. I feel like an alien. I ran my fingers over the words. I don't feel like I belong. I had written that line 100 times. I had thought it was a metaphor for teenage angst. I had thought it was just me being broken. I closed the journal. It wasn't a metaphor. It was an instinct. It was my soul recognizing the lie long before my brain did. I wasn't broken. I was stolen. And tomorrow, I was going to introduce myself to the woman who had been waiting for me for 30 years. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass, the dark eyes, the shape of my face, for the first time. I didn't look for Richard or Elaine in my features. I looked for Claire. "Hi," I whispered to the stranger in the glass. "It is nice to meet you." The conference room at Parker & Row was designed to intimidate. It was a vast expanse of polished mahogany and glass, suspended 30 floors above the streets of Brookridge. But as I sat there on a rainy Tuesday morning, clutching a cup of lukewarm water, I didn't feel intimidated. I felt a strange, vibrating numbness, like a bell that had been struck too hard and was still humming. Lydia sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid. She had told me that Andrew Hawthorne was flying in from Boston specifically to meet me. He was Eleanor's nephew, the son of her late brother, and the current executor of the family's remaining business interests while Eleanor was incapacitated. "He is skeptical," Lydia had warned me 10 minutes ago. "He has spent years chasing false leads and dead ends regarding Claire's baby. Don't take it personally if he asks for proof. I have the DNA results," I said, tapping the folder in front of me. "And I have the face my parents hated." The heavy glass doors swung open. A man walked in. He was in his late 40s, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the kind of effortless precision that screams old money. He had graying hair and a tired, etched face. He stopped 3 steps into the room. Lydia stood up. "Andrew, thank you for coming." Andrew Hawthorne didn't look at Lydia. He was looking at me. His gaze locked onto my face, scanning my features with a desperate, hungry intensity. He looked at my eyes, my chin, the way my hair fell around my shoulders. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and shaken. "My God," he whispered. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "Mr. Hawthorne." He took a step forward, then stopped himself, as if afraid that if he moved too fast, I might vanish. "You look just like her," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You look exactly like Claire. It is like seeing a ghost." "I am Julia," I said, extending a hand. "Julia Morgan." He took my hand. His grip was firm, warm, and trembling slightly. "Andrew," he said, "I am sorry for staring. It is just, we were told you died 30 years ago. We were told you were ashes." He sat down opposite me, keeping his eyes on my face as if trying to memorize me. Lydia slid a file across the table toward him, the independent DNA report I had run, plus the comparison she had compiled. "The markers are conclusive, Andrew," Lydia said softly. "The probability of relation to Eleanor is over 99%, and the non-match to the Morgans is absolute." Andrew barely glanced at the papers. "I don't need the papers," he said, still looking at me. "I can see it. Claire had that same expression when she was nervous, that same set of the jaw." He took a deep breath and ran a hand over his face. "You need to understand the history. Julia, my aunt, Eleanor. Losing Claire broke her. Claire was her entire world." "Lydia told me she died in childbirth," I said. "She did," Andrew said. "It was a complicated pregnancy. Claire was young, only 22. She went to a private clinic in upstate New York, CH Medical Services. It was run by a doctor, Evans. He was supposed to be the best, discreet, high-end. I flinched at the name of the clinic. It matched the stamp on my vaccination card. After Claire hemorrhaged, Andrew continued, his voice tightening, Evans told Eleanor that the baby had gone into respiratory distress and passed away within the hour. He claimed that because of the traumatic nature of the birth, he had handled the cremation immediately to spare the family the pain of seeing the body. Eleanor was sedated. She was grieving. She signed whatever papers he put in front of her. But she didn't believe him, I asked. Not in her heart. Andrew said, for years. She talked about the baby. We thought it was grief. We thought it was denial. But then, about 5 years later, Dr. Evans was indicted for insurance fraud and illegal adoption practices. The clinic was shut down. That was when Eleanor hired the private investigators. And they found me, I asked. They found a trail, Andrew corrected. About 8 years ago, a genetic genealogist found a cluster of DNA matches in Ohio that pointed to the Morgan family. We reached out. We sent letters to Richard and Elaine Morgan. We had a lawyer call them. I never saw any letters, I said, feeling a cold fury rising in my chest. We were stonewalled, Andrew said grimly. Your father Richard threatened to sue us for harassment. He claimed they had a watertight adoption decree and that their daughter had no relation to any Hawthorns. He was very aggressive. Without a court order or your consent, we couldn't force a test, and we didn't want to disrupt the life of a young woman if we were wrong. I looked down at the mahogany table, seeing my own reflection. They knew, I whispered. They knew who I was. They knew my family was looking for me, and they threatened you to keep me. It appears so, Lydia said. And we now know why. She opened the second folder, the financial one. She laid out the timeline of the trust fund access. Andrew, Lydia said, Julia has confirmed that 7 years ago, the Morgans suddenly came into money, a home renovation, a boat, new cars, that coincides exactly with the withdrawal from the miners' trust subaccount that was flagged in the audit. Andrew looked at the figures, his jaw tightening. They used Claire's money. They used the money Eleanor set aside for Claire's child, Lydia corrected. They accessed it using guardianship papers, likely claiming it was for your benefit, Julia, and then they spent it on themselves. They bought a boat, I said, the words tasting like bile. They bought a boat while I was working 2 jobs to pay for textbooks. Andrew looked at me, his expression hardening into a fierce protectiveness. That money was yours. It was always yours. Eleanor set it up the week she found out Claire was pregnant. She wanted her grandchild to be safe. He reached across the table and touched my hand again. I want you to meet her. She is fading. Julia. Her memory comes and goes, but she needs to know, before it is too late. I want to meet her, I said. Whispering Pines was less a medical facility and more a 5-star hotel that happened to employ nurses. The lobby smelled of fresh lavender and expensive floor wax. There was a grand piano in the corner and a view of a manicured garden that looked like something out of a glossy magazine. My heart was pounding as Andrew led me down the quiet, carpeted hallway of the memory care wing. She has good days and bad days, Andrew said quietly as we approached a door at the end of the hall. Today she is calm, but she might not understand everything. Just be patient with her. I will, I said. He knocked softly and opened the door. The room was beautiful, filled with sunlight and fresh flowers. In a large armchair by the window, a small, frail woman was sitting with a blanket over her lap, looking out at the birds in the feeder. Her hair was white and perfectly coiffed. Aunt Eleanor, Andrew said softly. The woman turned her head. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were bright, a piercing, intelligent blue. Andrew, she said, her voice thin but clear. You are late. The tea is cold. I brought someone to see you, Andrew said, stepping aside to reveal me. Eleanor Hawthorne looked at me. Her gaze was polite at first, the vague curiosity of the elderly meeting a stranger. Then, she stopped. Her eyes widened. She leaned forward, gripping the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning white. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "Claire," she whispered. I felt tears prick my eyes instantly. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I am Julia. I think I am your granddaughter." Eleanor stared at me. She swept her eyes over my face, taking in every detail, just as Andrew had. She looked at my nose, my mouth, the shape of my brow. "You have her eyes," she said, her voice trembling. "Oh, dear God, you have Claire's eyes." She reached out a shaking hand. I walked over and knelt beside her chair. I took her hand. It was soft and papery, fragile as a dried leaf. "They told me you were gone," she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "They told me you went with her." "I am here," I said, weeping openly now. "I am right here." She pulled me closer, her grip surprisingly strong. She touched my face, tracing the line of my jaw with her fingers. It was a touch of pure, unadulterated love, a touch I realized, with a pang of grief, I had never received from Elaine Morgan. Elaine touched me to fix my hair or adjust my collar. Eleanor touched me just to make sure I was real. "I am so sorry." Eleanor wept, pulling my forehead to rest against hers. "I am so sorry I didn't find you. I should have looked harder. I should have torn that building down. It is not your fault," I sobbed. "You didn't know." "I knew," she said fiercely. "In here." She pressed a hand to her chest. "I knew you were alive. I felt it, but I let them stop me." We sat there for a long time, me kneeling on the floor, her holding on to me as if I were a lifeline in a storm. Andrew stood by the door, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel like an imposter. I didn't feel like I was taking up space I hadn't earned. I felt a connection that went deeper than obligation or gratitude. It was blood. It was history. It was belonging. When we finally left, Eleanor was exhausted but peaceful. She made me promise to come back the next day. As we walked to the car, Andrew turned to me. "She hasn't been that lucid in months," he said. "You brought her back. Julia." "She brought me back too," I said. The emotional reunion was followed swiftly by the cold machinery of the law. Lydia wasted no time. The next morning, she filed a barrage of motions in the county court. She petitioned to unseal the records of the defunct CH Medical Services, citing new DNA evidence of a fraudulent death certificate. She filed for a full forensic accounting of the Claire Hawthorne Memorial Trust, and she filed a temporary restraining order against Richard and Elaine Morgan, preventing them from liquidating any assets. The evidence of the financial withdrawals was damning. Lydia showed me the bank statements she had obtained through a preliminary discovery request. There it was, in black and white, a transfer of $350,000 from the trust to a joint account held by Richard and Elaine Morgan. The memo line on the internal bank transfer simply read, "Guardian reimbursement." "They treated me like an expense report," I said, staring at the document in Lydia's office. "They treated you like a piggy bank," Lydia corrected. "And now they are going to panic." She was right. The Morgans did not go quietly. 2 days after the motions were filed, the backlash began. It started with a phone call from my Aunt Sarah Richard's sister. I had always liked Sarah. She was the one relative who seemed to genuinely care about me. I picked up the phone, hoping for support. "Julia," Sarah said, her voice icy, "I just got off the phone with your father. I cannot believe what I'm hearing." "Aunt Sarah," I began. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" she interrupted. "That you are suing the people who raised you, that you are trying to destroy your parents because you found some rich lady to latch onto." "That is not what is happening," I said, shocked. "They lied to me. Sarah, they stole from me." "They saved you," Sarah shouted. "Richard told me everything. He told me how your birth mother was a drug addict who abandoned you. I gasped. That is a lie. My mother died in childbirth. She was 22. That is not what Richard says, Sarah snapped. He says they made up a nice story to protect you. But the truth is you came from trash, and now you are acting like it, trying to cash in. It is disgusting. Julia, don't call me again until you come to your senses. She hung up. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking. They were spinning a new narrative. They were rewriting history again to paint themselves as the victims and me as the villain. The text from Tyler came an hour later. Nice try. Sis, Dad told me you are trying to freeze their accounts. You are literally trying to bankrupt the people who wiped your ass for 30 years. You are destroying the family brand for money. You are pathetic. Don't think you are getting a dime. I blocked his number. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt necessary. The smear campaign was effective. I received emails from 2 cousins telling me I was ungrateful and greedy. I was uninvited from a cousin's upcoming wedding via a Facebook message. It was a coordinated attack, designed to isolate me, to make the emotional cost of the lawsuit so high that I would drop it. But they had underestimated one thing: I wasn't alone anymore. Let them talk, Allison said that night. She was sitting on my living room floor, helping me organize the discovery documents. Every lie they tell is just more evidence of their character. Judge Dalton isn't going to care what Aunt Sarah thinks. She is going to care about the bank transfers. It still hurts, I admitted, pouring myself a glass of wine. I lost my entire extended family in 48 hours. You lost a fan club based on lies, Ben said. Ben had come over after work with takeout. He had become a constant presence in the last week, his quiet strength a counterbalance to the chaos. He was sitting at my kitchen table, highlighting sections of the Morgan deposition that Lydia had sent over. We need to prepare for the hearing, Ben said. Lydia said their lawyer is going to try to rattle you. He is going to try to make you look unstable. I feel unstable, I muttered. You are not, Ben said. You are angry. There is a difference. Let's practice. I will be their lawyer. You be you. He stood up and adjusted his glasses, putting on a stern, mock-serious face. Ms. Morgan, he began, pointing a finger at me. Is it not true that your parents paid for your food, your clothing, and your shelter for 30 years? Do you not think they deserve compensation for that burden? I took a deep breath, channeling the cold rage that had become my armor. They chose to adopt me, I said. Parents do not charge their children for existing, and they certainly do not steal their children's inheritance to buy boats. Good, Ben said. But keep your voice steady. Don't let your voice crack. If you cry, they win. If you yell, they win. You have to be ice. Ice, I repeated. My dad was like them, Ben said suddenly. Dropping the act, I looked at him. What? My dad, Ben said, sitting back down. He was a control freak. Not the stealing my inheritance kind, but the emotional kind. If I didn't play baseball, I was ungrateful. If I didn't want to be an engineer, I was wasting his investment. He used to tally up how much my hockey gear cost and tape the receipts to my bedroom door. Ben, I said softly, that is awful. I didn't speak to him for 5 years, Ben said. It was the hardest thing I ever did. Everyone told me I was a bad son. My aunts, my uncles, they all said, but he loves you. He just wants the best for you. They didn't see the receipts on the door. He looked at me, his eyes dark with understanding. I know what it feels like, Julia, to be made to feel like a debtor in your own home, like you owe them your soul just because they fed you. I always felt like I was in debt, I whispered. You are not, Ben said firmly. You are paid in full, and tomorrow you are going to show them the bill. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm, rough, and grounding. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. Thank you, I said. Anytime, Ben said. He didn't pull his hand away immediately, The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my small kitchen table, the two stacks of paper rising like towers before me. On the left was the Morgan file, the lies, the gaslighting texts, the fraudulent birth certificate, the bank transfers labeled reimbursement. It was a monument to conditional love. On the right was the Hawthorne file, the DNA results, the trust documents, the letters Eleanor had tried to send, the photo of a young Claire Hawthorne laughing at a picnic. It was a promise of a past I never got to have. I realized then that the hearing tomorrow wasn't just about the money. The money was just the weapon. The war was about ownership. Richard and Elaine believed they owned me. They believed that because they had acquired me, fed me, and housed me, they owned my narrative. They owned my loyalty. They owned my silence. I picked up the pen and pulled a fresh sheet of paper from my notebook. I wasn't writing a journal entry. I was writing a statement. I am not a Morgan. I wrote, I am not an investment. I am not a mistake. I looked at the Hawthorne file. I am the daughter of Claire Hawthorne. I am the granddaughter of Eleanor. But then, I paused. I looked at the empty space between the two piles. And I am Julia. I wrote, just Julia. Whatever the judge decided tomorrow, whatever the DNA said, I was the one who had to live this life. I was the one who had to decide who got a seat at my table. The Morgans had lost their seat. They had flipped the table. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights of Brookridge blinked back at me, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere out there, Richard and Elaine were probably strategizing with their lawyer, coming up with new ways to call me crazy. Somewhere out there. Tyler was probably deleting his texts. Let them, I thought. I turned off the light in the kitchen, leaving the two piles of paper in the dark. I didn't need to study them anymore. I knew the story by heart. I went to my bedroom and laid out my clothes for court, a dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, minimal makeup. Ice, I whispered to the empty room, repeating Ben's advice. I lay down in bed, but I didn't close my eyes for a long time. I thought about Eleanor's hand holding mine. I thought about the look on Andrew's face when he first saw me. And I thought about the $350,000 that had turned into a kitchen renovation and a boat. For 30 years, I had been afraid of losing my parents. I had twisted myself into knots to keep them. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into a courtroom and do the one thing they never thought I was capable of. I was going to let them go. The Brookridge County Courthouse was a building designed to make you feel small. It was a looming structure of gray stone and imposing columns, built in an era when justice was meant to look like a fortress. As I walked up the wide concrete steps on a crisp Wednesday morning, I felt the weight of the architecture pressing down on me. But for the first time in weeks, my knees didn't buckle. I was flanked by my team. On my left walked Lydia Parker, carrying her leather portfolio like a shield. On my right was Andrew Hawthorne, whose presence was a quiet, steadying force. I was wearing my navy suit, the one I had bought for my first big presentation at the marketing firm, the one that made me feel like a professional who could handle anything. Today, I wasn't just handling a presentation, I was dismantling my life. We entered the courtroom, a cavernous space with high ceilings and rows of wooden benches that smelled of lemon polish and old dust. It wasn't a criminal trial, not yet, but a preliminary hearing on the civil motions Lydia had filed, the freezing of assets, the accounting of the trust, and the unsealing of the medical records. I saw them immediately. Richard and Elaine Morgan were sitting at the defense table. They looked different, smaller. Richard's suit, usually impeccable, looked slightly loose at the shoulders, as if he had shrunk in the wash. Elaine was pale, her hands fluttering nervously in her lap, twisting a tissue into a tight white rope. They didn't look like the giants who had dominated my childhood. They looked like two frightened, aging people who had been caught. When they saw me, Elaine started to rise, a look of desperate appeal on her face. But their lawyer, a slick, balding man named Mr. Sterling, put a hand on her arm and pulled her back down. Richard just stared at me, his jaw set in a hard line, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and betrayal. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I walked past them and took my seat at the plaintiff's table. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Marissa Dalton entered the room. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to see through walls. She took her seat on the bench, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the files before her. "We are here in the matter of Morgan versus Morgan," Judge Dalton said, her voice crisp and amplified by the microphone. "Regarding the petition for emergency injunctive relief and the motion to compel records, Ms. Parker, you may proceed." Lydia stood up. She was calm, methodical, and terrifyingly efficient. "Your Honor," Lydia began, "this case is about a deception that has spanned 3 decades. It is about the systematic erasure of a child's identity and the subsequent looting of her financial future." Lydia laid it out, piece by piece. She spoke about my birth in 1994 at CH Medical Services. She spoke about the fraudulent death certificate issued to Eleanor Hawthorne. She spoke about the shady private arrangement Richard and Elaine had made with a disgraced doctor to acquire a baby. But the deception did not end with the adoption, Lydia continued. Pacing slowly before the bench, for 30 years, the defendants concealed the plaintiff's true heritage, even when inquiries were made by the biological family. And 7 years ago, when the plaintiff was 23 years old, the defendants discovered a trust fund established for the living issue of Claire Hawthorne. Lydia held up a document. Using guardianship papers that were likely obtained through fraud, Richard and Elaine Morgan accessed this trust. They withdrew over $300,000. They did not use this money for Julia's education. They did not use it for her medical care. They used it to renovate their home, purchase a recreational boat, and pay off the debts of their biological son, Tyler Morgan. I heard a gasp from the gallery. I turned slightly and saw that a few reporters had slipped into the back row. Notebooks open. The viral video had done its work. The world was watching. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of funds, and unjust enrichment, Lydia concluded. We are asking the court to freeze all assets held by the defendants until a full forensic accounting can be completed. Judge Dalton nodded slowly, making a note. She turned her gaze to the defense table. Mr. Sterling. Richard's lawyer stood up. He buttoned his jacket and put on a smile that was meant to be charming but came off as oily. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice smooth. Ms. Parker tells a dramatic story. But it is a work of fiction. The reality is much simpler. My clients, Richard and Elaine Morgan, are heroes. I felt Andrew stiffen beside me. I reached under the table and gripped the edge of my chair. 30 years ago, Sterling continued, they rescued an infant from a chaotic, unstable situation. The mother was dead. The biological family was absent. The clinic was closing. My clients stepped in. They took Julia into their home. They gave her their name. They raised her with love and provided her with a privileged upbringing in Willow Creek. And the money, Judge Dalton asked, cutting through the rhetoric. Reimbursement, Your Honor, Sterling said without missing a beat. Raising a child is expensive. Private tutors, orthodontics, summer camps. The Morgans spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own money on Julia when they discovered the trust fund years later. They viewed it as a rightful repayment for the debts they had incurred to give her a good life. It was a family resource, used for family survival. Sterling turned to look at me, his eyes cold. It is tragic. Really, my client sacrificed everything for this young woman, and now, manipulated by outside parties seeking a payout, she is biting the hand that fed her. She is ungrateful, Your Honor, and she is being used. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. It was the same narrative, ungrateful, rescue, sacrifice. They were taking the abuse they had inflicted on me and painting it as charity. Judge Dalton looked at Richard and Elaine. Is that your position? That the $300,000 was reimbursement? Richard stood up, ignoring his lawyer's gesture to sit. It was our money to manage, he blurted out. We were her parents. We decided what was best for the family. She had a roof over her head. She had food. She didn't need to know about the accounts. "Sit down. Mr. Morgan," Judge Dalton said sharply. Lydia stood up again. "Your Honor, regarding the claim that the defendants acted out of love and necessity, I would like to enter into evidence a recording made by the plaintiff on October 24th of this year. It is a conversation that took place in the defendant's home." "Objection," Sterling said quickly. "We have not authenticated. It was provided in discovery." "Counsel," Judge Dalton snapped. "Play it." Lydia pressed a button on her laptop, and Richard's voice filled the courtroom. It was loud, angry, and stripped of all the polish he was trying to display today. "We used the money. It was ours to manage. She didn't need to know where it came from." Then, Elaine's voice, shrill and panicked. "We had to help Tyler. He was in trouble. We couldn't let him go to jail. We used the money to fix things." And then, the line that made the air in the courtroom turn to ice. "She should be grateful we kept her. The Hawthorns just wanted a symbol, not a child." Lydia stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I looked at Elaine. She had her face buried in her hands. Richard was staring at the table, his face a mottled red. "The Hawthorns wanted a symbol," Lydia repeated, her voice cutting like a razor. "That does not sound like a rescue. Your Honor, that sounds like a kidnapping committed out of spite." Judge Dalton took off her glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, then looked directly at me. "Ms. Morgan," she said. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Yes, Your Honor." "I have read your affidavit," the judge said. "I have seen the video of the birthday party. I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer me honestly." "Okay," I said. "Your parents, the defendants, claim they were acting in your best interest," Judge Dalton said. "They claim that revealing the truth was an attempt to be honest with you. How did the events of your 30th birthday affect your decision to bring this suit?" I took a breath. I thought about the blue dress. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the years of feeling like I was auditioning for a role I couldn't get. "It wasn't honesty, Your Honor," I said, my voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with every word. "If they wanted to be honest, they could have told me privately. They could have sat me down at the kitchen table 10 years ago. They could have told me when I was 18. I looked at Richard and Elaine. They chose to do it at a party. They invited strangers. They invited my boss. They printed the DNA results on a card like it was a party favor. They laughed when they told me I didn't belong." I turned back to the judge. For my entire life, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. I felt like their love was something I had to pay for, and that night, I realized I was right. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a bad investment they were finally writing off. They wanted to humiliate me because I stopped giving them money. They wanted to break me. I paused, blinking back tears. But they didn't break me. They just woke me up. Judge Dalton looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable but soft around the edges. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan. You may sit." Then, she turned to the defense table. Her eyes were no longer soft. They were steel. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," Judge Dalton said. "Stand up." Richard and Elaine stood up slowly. They looked like children called to the principal's office. "I have heard your counsel argue that you are heroes," Judge Dalton said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I have heard you claim that you used the trust money to save the family, but I have one question that I cannot reconcile." She leaned forward. "If you believed you were acting in this child's best interests, if you truly loved her as a daughter, why was the truth only revealed during a public birthday party, accompanied by mockery, instead of in a private, compassionate conversation years ago?" The courtroom fell silent. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Sterling, but the lawyer was staring at his shoes. Elaine let out a sob. "We were frustrated," Richard stammered finally. "She was drifting away. We wanted to shock her back into reality." "Shock her?" Judge Dalton repeated, her eyebrows raising. with a DNA test in a restaurant. We thought it would be funny, Elaine whispered, her voice barely audible. We thought, if we made a joke of it, it wouldn't hurt so much. You thought telling your child she was a biological stranger would be funny? Judge Dalton asked, incredulous. Elaine didn't answer. She just wept. The excuse collapses, Judge Dalton said, sitting back. It collapses under the weight of its own cruelty. I do not see heroes in this courtroom. Mr. Morgan, I see two people who exploited a vulnerable child for financial gain and then discarded her when she became inconvenient. She picked up her gavel. I am granting the plaintiff's motion for a full forensic accounting of the Claire Hawthorne Memorial Trust and all assets held by the defendants. I am appointing an independent financial investigator to trace every penny withdrawn in the last 10 years. Richard slumped in his chair. I am also granting the petition to unseal the records of CH Medical Services, the judge continued. And given the nature of the emotional harm inflicted, I am issuing a temporary restraining order. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, you are to have no contact with Julia Morgan, no phone calls, no visits, no text messages. Any communication must be in writing and directed through her attorney. She looked at me one last time. Julia, I hope this is the beginning of some peace for you. Bang, the gavel came down. It was the best sound I had ever heard. Court is adjourned, the bailiff yelled. I sat there for a moment, letting the relief wash over me. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was the feeling of putting down a heavy backpack after a 30-mile hike. I looked at Lydia. She was smiling, a genuine, fierce smile. We got them, she whispered. We got them, I said. I stood up and looked across the aisle. Richard and Elaine were arguing with their lawyer. They looked old. They looked tired. And for the first time in 30 years, they looked irrelevant. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was chaotic. A dozen reporters were waiting, their cameras clicking as soon as the doors opened. The story of the birthday party had gone national, a viral sensation of bad parenting, and the public was hungry for the next chapter. Julia, Julia, how do you feel? Is it true you are an heiress? What do you have to say to your parents? I kept my head down, shielding my eyes from the flashbulbs. Andrew stepped in front of me, using his height to create a barrier. Ms. Morgan has no comment at this time, Andrew said, his voice carrying over the din. This is a private family matter. A family is trying to make things right after a long deception. Please respect her privacy. Lydia guided me through the throng, her hand firmly on my elbow. Keep walking. Julia, don't look at them. Eyes forward. We made it to the elevator and the doors slid shut. Cutting off the noise, the silence was sudden and blissful. You did it, Andrew said, looking at me with pride. Claire would have been so proud of you today. I think she was there, I said softly. I really think she was. We didn't go out to celebrate. There was no champagne. Instead, I asked Andrew to drive me to Whispering Pines. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows of Eleanor's room when we arrived. She was sitting in her chair by the window, a blanket tucked around her knees. She seemed frailer today, drifting in and out of sleep. I sat in the chair beside her. I didn't talk about the court. I didn't talk about Richard or the money. That world felt very far away in this quiet, sunlit room. I reached into my bag and pulled out my old journal, the one with the peeling leather cover that I had kept since I was 12. Grandma, I said softly. Eleanor stirred. She opened her eyes, those piercing blue eyes that mirrored my own. She smiled, a slow, gentle expression that lit up her face. Claire, she whispered. It is Julia, I said gently. But Claire is here too. I opened the journal. I want to read you something. I wrote this when I was 14. I was sitting on the roof of the garage because I wanted to see the stars. Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixing on my face. October 14th, 2008. I read aloud. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Dad says I should be an accountant because it is safe. Mom says I should marry someone rich, but I think I want to be an explorer. I want to find things that are lost. I want to go to places where nobody knows me and build a house made of glass so I can see the sky all the time. I want to be someone who is kind, even when people are mean. I think that is the hardest adventure of all." I looked up. Eleanor was crying silently. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "You found it," she whispered. "You found the lost thing." "I did," I said, squeezing back. "I found us." We sat there for a long time as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I read her more entries, the funny ones, the hopeful ones, the dreams of a girl who didn't know she was already loved by someone she had never met. That evening, I stood in the center of my apartment. It was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I had cleared off the kitchen table. The stacks of legal documents were gone, filed away in boxes. The space was clean. On the table sat 2 envelopes. The first was a large, white envelope from the court, containing the official orders from Judge Dalton. It represented the end of the war. It was the shield that would protect me from Richard and Elaine forever. The second was a thick, cream-colored envelope that had arrived in the afternoon mail. It was handwritten. I recognized the script immediately, my mother's perfect, looping calligraphy. Julia. It said on the front, just Julia, not Ms. Morgan, not daughter. I picked it up. It felt heavy. I knew what was inside. It would be a letter filled with justifications. It would be 10 pages of how could you and we did our best, and remember the time we took you to Disney World. It was a final attempt to rewrite the narrative, to pull me back into the web of guilt and obligation. I stood there, holding the letter. I could open it. I could read their final words. I could let their voices into my head one last time. But then I looked at the small, framed photo I had placed on the table next to the envelopes. It was a picture Andrew had given me, a snapshot of Eleanor and a pregnant Claire, laughing in a garden, their heads thrown back in pure, unburdened joy. I looked at their smiles. I looked at the letter. I walked over to the trash can in the corner of the kitchen. I didn't tear the letter up. That would have been angry. That would have been passion. I simply dropped it in, unopened. It landed with a soft thud among the coffee grounds and junk mail. I turned back to the table. I picked up the court order and placed it in my drawer. Then I picked up the photo of Eleanor and Claire. I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of Brookridge. I was 30 years old. I had a new name waiting for me if I wanted it. I had a grandmother who loved me. I had a friend who had stood by me in the fire. And I had a future that was entirely, terrifyingly, wonderfully my own. "I am Julia," I whispered to the city, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Julia's journey resonated with you. It is a story about the family we are born into, the family that raises us, and the family we choose for ourselves. It is a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comfortable lie. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a bustling city like Brookridge, or somewhere quiet and remote? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, resilience, and turning the tables coming your way. Share your thoughts on Julia's decision in the comments. Did she do the right thing by throwing that letter away? Until next time, take care of yourselves.